And now I have the honor to welcome the Secretary of State, Eva Svedling, who is working in the Department of Environment. And you may be able to introduce yourself a little bit more, but you have got the hard question. Why is Greta Thunberg, why is it necessary for her to continue to go on striking? Why can't we just change and come in compliance with, if not 1.5, at least 2.0 degree of warming, as Johan Rockström and others now say is the most likely that we could achieve? Why? Why, in God's sake, can't we just do it differently? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would be, of course, more than happy if I could say, if I had a clear and concrete answer to that question. And I would be more than happy if we could just change everything, change the collective system and change our own individual lifestyles. But I will come back to that and also try to identify a few obstacles and try to understand why Greta is going on strike and why she needs to continue. I would like to start by thanking for the invitation to speak at this very inspiring and interesting and important conference, trying to understand climate change from a more existential or spiritual or religious perspective. I think that's very interesting, very necessary and important. I would also first, maybe I should introduce myself a bit more. I'm State Secretary for Climate, also responsible for Agenda 2030, the coordination domestically within the government. I've been a State Secretary responsible for climate since 2016, then at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs and now at the Ministry for Environment. And it's of course, very demanding, but also very interesting and challenging job. I would like to start by just saying, I will come back to that later, but we also need to see when things are changing, and we also need to grab the hope and the possibilities, because the domestic aviation is declining, not so much as we would like it to, but it's really declining, and also the consumption of meat in Sweden from a very high level, and still in relation to many other countries very high, but it's changing, and that's something is moving, and we need to be a part of that, I think. Unfortunately, I just arrived, so I've not heard all of the speeches today, but I know from my meetings and cooperation with many of you that very important and incredible work is going on within the religious community in relation to climate change. I heard the Stern report being mentioned about the costs, and we need to see that, and I think it's hard for all of us to understand how huge the costs would be if we're not acting. And also I heard it mentioned the economy, and that there's not going to be any economy at all on a dead planet, of course. And I will come back to that, the connection between climate action and economy a bit later. I think religion and climate change, we can see many ties, particularly in helping us grasping the existential threats of that climate change brings. As in the bishop's letter about the climate stated, the challenge of climate change is existential and spiritual, because it concerns the basic conditions of human life. And I know that you have been talking about the bishops. I think it's a very interesting book, and I come back to that text every now and then. And therefore, I'm really glad that we have recently seen many religious and spiritual leaders. We have seen them stepping up, taking a leading role on climate action and on the climate agenda. And for the religious community, of course, this makes a lot of sense. Climate action is essential, summing up the idea of stewardship, handing over a planet to the next generation in which the major environmental problems have been solved. There are also ties between politics and religion, driven by ideology and wanting to change things, hoping for a better society. And I'm representing the Green Party, being part of the Green movement, and we are speaking about our three solidarities. The solidarity with all human beings, and that's also, of course, connected to the equalization, the vision of equalization, and the solidarity with nature and animals, and the solidarity with future and coming generations. There are a lot of connections between politics and religion. And I think it's extremely important also that the religious community and the political sphere now work closer together towards this goal. We need to work closer together from many sectors within the society. And we all play a very important part in limiting global warming, and we need a coordinated response. I think I heard that being said, that was said also here before. And for me and my role here today, I'm representing the Swedish government, is to shed light on the political aspects of meeting the generational targets, to discuss also, that was expressed here, why Greta Thunberg are on strike for the climate, and to describe the obstacles and trying to identify the obstacles for a transition that I have observed, both in Sweden and a bit in Europe and on the international level. But why does Greta Thunberg have to go on striking for the climate? I would like to start with her movement, Fridays for Future. Each Friday for now over a year, we have seen millions of young people joining her on her school strikes. It's a huge moment over the whole movement over the whole world. And she has also become the face of a new generation standing up for its future. And what we see is a new leadership, and we also see a leadership with a female face. Many of those leaders for the movements in other countries are also young women or girls. We see, that was also mentioned here, I heard that, the child rights agenda. What we see is the child rights agenda wanting more, being part of the solutions, being part of the discussions, being part of the decision making, the child rights agenda being integrated with the climate action agenda, the rights-based agenda for democracy and the climate action agenda, which is, of course, very hopeful. And I believe, to try to answer that question, very simple, why this generation is protesting, they, of course, they see their own future is at stake, while at the same time the world leaders are doing far from enough to save it. There is a big gap between that, and they are, of course, scared, and they are using their anger and the strong feelings to act and to put pressure on the decision makers, which is very good. And I deeply sympathize with Greta and her followers. Their voices must be heard, and I'm saying must because I think we're not going to be successful in this if we're not listening to them. And we need to canalize their movement to both anger, because our children are at danger, of course, we know that from science, it's true, as well as action and hope, because we need to envision and bring forward a solution. And their voices need to be heard, and we need to act, because we need to listen to them and make them be part of the way forward. Otherwise, what will happen is, with the current commitments under the Paris Agreement, we are heading towards a 3-degree warmer world by the end of this century, and that would be catastrophic, and that would have terrible consequences, including, and we all, I think we in this room, we all know this, we will see melting polar ices, more frequent extreme weather, and increasing uninhabitable areas on the planet. not talking about how migration and people not having enough food and they need to move. And the risk for irreversible and in some cases also those abrupt environmental changes would be very high in a 3-degree warmer world. And we know what we need to do. That is also what Greta is saying. Let's unite behind science. We all know this. We have enough reports and we have enough knowledge. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, they have spelled out what's required very clearly to us. If we are to succeed within limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, which is the necessary level, and thus mitigating the most adverse impacts on climate change, we need to globally halve our emissions by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. And those are not only numbers, those are very hard work to reach that. We really need to change. We need a transition, we need a systemic change, and we need to change our own individual lifestyles. And if we don't listen to this strong message and take action to stop carbon emissions in time, the world that a child born today would meet when she reaches my age would be devastating. It's not to imagine. So we need to take action. Politicians like myself, we need to act now and we need to do it fast, and we say that, but we need also to do it. We all know that another world is possible, and we need to create visions of the opportunities that the transition towards a fossil-free society will possess. And the Swedish government is committed to lead the way. This is why we have adopted the ambitious target of becoming the world's first fossil-free welfare state, and according to our parliamentary bound target, we shall reach net zero emissions by 2045 at the latest. That's bound with the parliament, and we also have, during our last term in office, we introduced numerous climate policies, and that includes the Climate Act and our Climate Policy Council. Our new framework forces every Swedish government to track their progress in meeting our targets. This parliamentary time we're going to step up our action even further. We need to take the next steps, but we have the legislation in place, which is a very good platform to continue. And we also see from that point similar progress in many other countries. We now see Finland. They also have this ambition to be the world's fossil-free welfare state. We see Denmark and we see the UK. They have raised their ambition on their national work and introduced similar institutional arrangement as ours. So we have also been inspiring other countries. And hopefully many others will follow our path towards net zero. And in 2 weeks, the UN Secretary General has invited world leaders to New York to attend the Climate Action Summit. And the Secretary General has urged governments to bring, and he said that very, very clearly, to bring concrete, realistic plans to enhance their national determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. He does not want them to come with words and speeches, but with action. And hopefully we will see the much needed action and ambition that our children demand. They will also be there. Greta, as you all know, will be there, and many other children and youth will be there in New York. And there's both hope and development within the climate field, but there are still large obstacles in our way of reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement. We all know that, and we need to see them, and we need to overcome them. And what I have found during my years within the climate policy, is, one of the biggest obstacles is to, and I think that was also mentioned of you, we need to stop treating climate change as one small subsector, and we need to truly integrate the mitigation policies in all relevant policies. We cannot see that economic policies is one sector and climate policies is another. We need to make the climate action and the climate agenda the absolute fundamental of the economic policies to get the necessary transition and systemic change. And this means that we also need to put example of infrastructure planning, our industry development, forestry sector, and our education policies in line with the Paris Agreement. First of all, we need to figure out what that means. How can you integrate the Paris Agreement in all those policy areas? Not to speak about how we need to integrate it in the policies for international cooperation. But we must also look beyond our national borders. Far too often we have adopted a very, you could call it nationalistic perspective on our emissions. And I'm not saying that we do not need our national targets, because they are very important to put pressure within the national politics. But for example, we haven't done enough here in Sweden to lower the climate impact from our consumption. While the domestic emissions have decreased with 26% since the 90s, our consumption-based emissions have actually increased during this time. And that is all, very much due to what you were mentioned before, the imported meat and international aviation. And there are now twice as large as our domestic emissions. So we also need the integrated and holistic view in that area. And this is of course unacceptable. And I will try to, and we will try to focus our work in the coming years towards lowering the emissions. And to start, we give the Parliament a task to draft new targets to also include consumption-based in our climate targets, to see, to be able to follow the statistics. And hopefully this will spur both collective and individual action. I think the time is now. Now it's possible to talk about consumption connected to climate change and climate action. That was when we started in the Green Party to speak about that. That was no one would listen, and that would just regard it as nonsense. Another obstacles that I have witnessed during my years in climate policy is that ambitious policies often tend to seem it's easier on the drawing board than out in the real life, of course. And because at the same time as we roll out more ambitious climate policies, we need also to have a broad acceptance for those measures. It's easy to say, why don't politicians do more? We know what we need to do. Why don't we have those taxes and everything in place? We also need to do this in a democratic way. We need to mobilize and have acceptance for the policies that we put in place. And we have recently seen a setback of ambitious policies that are considered unjust. For example, we have seen a reluctance for higher gas prices both in France and in Germany, but also quite recently in Sweden, and that's still a very hard discussion between the political parties, how to, you have seen that in the newspapers, if the hiring the CO2 taxes. And to overcome such obstacles, we need to communicate that such policies are, of course, necessary, and that fossil-free society is worth striving for. People must get a share of the new jobs, a share of the increased profitability and productivity to ensure a sustainable society on the social aspects. And the welfare system needs to be strengthened to be able to ensure that no one is left behind in a transition. And therefore, to come back again to the education policies and educational system, we also need to change it and the social welfare system to be able to make it possible for people to have the competence that they need and that the society need in the future. And in Sweden, this integrated approach relates to the vision of the fossil-free welfare state, both as the climate action and the social aspect. On the European stage, it's tougher to get acceptance for ambitious climate policies. It's very hard within the European Union. We have some countries with large coal mines, countries that heavily rely on fossil fuel in the energy sector, and countries that are led also by, which is also part of this, led by authoritarian regimes. They have a far worse positioned to communicate the positive aspect of the transition and take lead on the climate action. And maybe in some cases they don't even want to communicate in that way. And there we have, as the Swedish government and the Swedish politicians, we have a responsibility of showing the way. We should not underestimate the importance of good examples and to leading the way. And we need to adopt and communicate a cathedral thinking, bridging the Paris Agreement with overall sustainable development and also connecting it to the Agenda 2030, of course. And in communicating these visions and gaining support for the people, I believe we have very much to learn also from the religious community and from religious leaders, and I think we can in the future cooperate. And religion already plays an inescapable role as a hub for discussion and discussing the existential threats of climate change, and they are severe. And therefore, I hope we can discuss how we can together spread the message of the urgency of climate action. And I know that work has already started and it's ongoing. And I believe that we together can really move mountains. As I said, we need also to see where there's hope. And we need to hand over a planet to the next generation in which the major environmental problems have been solved. That is our responsibility as a whole of society and each sector. And of course, politicians have a great part of that responsibility. Thank you.
Kan du sätta dig ner så länge så
Ja.
vi har mikrofonen?
My name is Ulrika Johansson, and I have a question here on what is your opinion on the government's decision now not to sign the UN Treaty of Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. From my point of view, as long as a threat from a use of these kinds of weapon prevails, we live under a very serious environmental threat. So, what do you have to say on this? I would be very curious.
Yes, please.
I can say, representing the Green Party in the government, that we did what we could, as much as we could, and that's no secret that we wanted it to go in another way. We're not the strongest part in the government.
No, so there were, and within the Social Democratic Party, there were also two sides, I think, and the stronger side was the more hesitant side. So, but Sweden has become an observer to the Convention on Banning Nuclear Weapons. So we hope that the fight is not over, but la lucha continúa. Yes, do we have more questions?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I feel that this question about climate change is so important that sometimes it's a pity that it's politically charged in that parties from over the scale politicize it. Do you have any thoughts on how we may proceed from that and come to some kind of greater agreement on this big, important question?
I think that it's very important what you're addressing. I think it's absolutely necessary that we create a platform where many parties can participate and work together, because we need to have a strong way forward. Therefore, I think it's so important that we have the parliamentary bound targets that we are all parties except SD stand behind those targets in the parliament, and therefore it's a very strong platform. And we also have the Climate Act and the climate policy framework, and I think we need to continue to take steps forward. And now it's also a strong cooperation with the four parties going forward. So I think we need to find solutions that are common, and we need to see that we don't have any alternative to go in another way, not acting on the climate change agenda.
Thank you.
Yes, I think, Felicia, we have one question there.
Hi. Maybe this is directed towards both you and the previous speaker in previous discussion. I am quite critical of the rhetoric about us all coming together and no left and right, and as soon as everybody just learns to be on Greta's side, it will all be okay, and just print her face on our shirts and follow her on Instagram and whatever. I think nothing could be more dangerous than to say that we know what to do, or we should all come together, because there is a political discussion here that needs to be had, and I think without it, the political debate and different opinions will fall back on the ruling invisible ideology that we have, which is capitalism, and which is a movement that has done very much good, but is also responsible for why we are where we are, and it's also something that we all in this room gain a lot from, but we are very responsible in this. And I think that we need left and right to discuss the economical development. And this also goes back on the Archbishop's claim in the end that the church have divested and invested ethically, and we pat ourselves on the back for this. But what bothers me is that, I don't know, we were able to divest and make money, yay! And this is to me the opposite of being a poor church, quite literally. I think we have to think about how we more radically and more metaphysically can actually protest against the political situation where politics is just a spel för gallerierna or a theater, while the economics are really the ones, like the ones with money are the ones in power. And that's where we have to, I don't know, protest. Does the church want to be a part of this? And I don't know really where this ends, but yeah.
Thank you. I think I will add one question to that. How do we change an economic system from fossil-driven capitalism and coal-driven capitalism to something which is within planetary and social boundaries?
Difficult questions, but of course important. I think it's actually the discussion about how, in what way do we change the society? And I think we need different ways. We need the political parties taking responsibility, and we need to, in the same, going forward, we also need to do it, at least that's my, I'm convinced that we need to do that. We need to go forward in a democratic way. But we see Greta, she's not a politician, she's a climate activist. She's pushing for more action from the political system, and I think, I still think, I agree with you that the economic system, of course, is one of the main or fundamental problems, and we need to change that. And we're speaking about an economic transition, but the question is, how do we proceed? Can we change it going step by step? Or do we need to do it in a revolutionary way? And I still think that we can go forward changing it step by step and mobilizing people and support for that at the same time. And I would take one example. You saw the decision about Prim in Lysekil. That would not have been possible without the legislation and the system, the climate systems that we have put in place. The climate policy framework, our targets, and the Climate Act, and also the Climate Policy Council, because they pointed out that as well. And that's a very, very important decision in changing the society to go in a way that we phase out fossil fuels.
Thank you very much, Eva Svedling. I think we have to stop there, but we wish you lots of strength in your work in the government. Thank you.
Thank you so much.